George's voice thundered through the front door, disrupting the peaceful hum of my evening. I was in the kitchen, bent over the sink, rinsing off the last of the dinner dishes when I heard the front door creak open. "Gloria! I'm home. Got someone with me." His voice was loud as it usually was, but there was an unfamiliar relaxed tone to it this time. It wasn't a common occurrence for George to bring someone home without notice. I quickly dried my hands and smoothed my sweater, a habit I had yet to shake. Even after all these years of marriage, I made my way to the entryway just as George entered, closely followed by a man I didn't recognize. At first, all I could see was his outline. He was tall, lean yet sturdy, with broad shoulders and a stance that suggested he wasn't here for idle chatter. When he stepped into the light, my breath caught in my throat. "Gloria, this is Russell." George clapped his hand on the stranger's shoulder. "He's my new hire at the company. Sharp as a tack. This one." He gestured to Russell. "We have some things to discuss for tomorrow's big meeting, so I thought we'd do it here in peace." Russell offered me a small, polite smile, but his eyes held an undeniable spark. He was striking. His dark skin was smooth and flawless, and his cheekbones seemed sculpted from stone. His jawline was so defined it could have cut glass, and a neatly trimmed beard framed his full lips. I suddenly realized I was staring. My cheeks flushed as I forced myself to look away. "Nice to meet you, ma'am." His voice was deep and calm, yet it carried a warmth, as if he brought a bit of sunshine with him wherever he went. "Same here," I managed, my tone softer than I intended. "Welcome to our home." I glanced at George, who had already kicked off his shoes and tossed his coat onto the armchair. He seemed completely at ease, blissfully unaware of the magnetic aura that surrounded Russell. I felt an inexplicable pull towards him, like a moth drawn to a porch light on a warm summer night. I needed a diversion and quickly. "Can I get you boys some coffee?" I asked, slipping back into my role as the hostess, trying to anchor myself. "That'd be great, honey," George replied with a grin, already setting a stack of papers on the dining table. "Coffee sounds good," Russell added, his gaze lingering on me just a beat longer than necessary. A tightness formed in my chest, not from discomfort but something far more confusing. It was a subtle look, yet it made my heart race. I busied myself with making the coffee, my hands trembling slightly as I measured the grounds. My mind whirled, attempting to make sense of the strange feelings blossoming within me. I hadn't experienced anything like this in years, decades perhaps. George and I had been married for 33 years, and while our love was strong, it had become predictable. Comforting, yes, but also monotonous. A life of routines. Coffee at 6:30 a.m., evening news at 7 p.m., discussions about grocery lists and retirement plans. And now here was this young man, Russell. He was vibrant, self-assured, and handsome in a way that felt almost perilous. I silently chided myself. I was old enough to be his mother, for heaven's sake. I had no reason to feel flustered over someone like him. Yet the warmth in my chest persisted. When I returned to the dining room with the tray, the two were already engrossed in conversation. George was droning on about sales projections, graphs, and who knew what else while Russell listened, nodding along with that easy smile still on his lips. I set the tray on the table and began pouring their coffee. George barely glanced up, too wrapped up in his business. Russell caught my eye for just a moment. "Thank you, ma'am," he said as he took the cup from my hand. His fingers brushed against mine for a fleeting second, sending a shiver down my spine. "You're welcome," I murmured, my heart pounding in my chest. I stepped back, clasping my hands together to suppress the urge to fidget. It wasn't just that Russell was attractive. It was how he carried himself. He radiated a quiet confidence, a calm assurance that made you want to lean in closer just to catch his next words. Meanwhile, George continued talking, oblivious to the peculiar tension hanging in the air. I wondered if he sensed it, if he noticed how Russell's presence seemed to alter the atmosphere around us. I settled into a chair across the room, pretending to read a magazine, though I couldn't concentrate on a single word. Instead, I stole glances at the two men at the table. George looked exactly like the man I had married all those years ago. Graying hair, a slight belly from too many beers and barbecues, and the familiar furrow in his brow whenever work was the topic. Then there was Russell, lean with arms that suggested he took care of himself. The contrast was striking, and I couldn't help but wonder if I were 30 years younger. Would I have been drawn to someone like Russell? The thought surprised me. I shifted in my seat, crossing my legs to ease the heat creeping up my neck. "Hey, Gloria," George called, pulling me from my thoughts. "Could you grab us some snacks? Maybe those pretzels you like." "Of course," I replied, forcing a smile, relieved for an excuse to leave the room again. In the kitchen, I leaned against the counter, pressing my cool hands to my flushed cheeks. What was happening to me? I wasn't some lovesick teenager. I was a grown woman, married, settled, content. And yet, the way Russell looked at me, the way he spoke, calm, respectful, with just the faintest hint of something more, made me feel alive. I hadn't realized how much I missed that sensation. Back in the dining room, I placed the bowl of pretzels on the table and hovered awkwardly, uncertain whether to linger or leave. Russell's gaze met mine once more, soft yet intent, as if he perceived more than I was willing to reveal. "You've got a lovely home, ma'am," he remarked, his voice deep and smooth. I felt a blush rise to my cheeks as I whispered, "Thank you," embarrassed by the flutter of my heart at his compliment. George chuckled beside us. "Yeah, Gloria has a real talent for decor. She's always rearranging things. It drives me up the wall," he added with a playful grin. "But it does look good, right?" Russell smiled, but his eyes lingered on me. A moment longer than was necessary. The rest of the evening faded into a blur of light banter and business discussions. I remained mostly quiet, listening to their talk of spreadsheets and quarterly reports while my thoughts drifted until Russell finally rose to leave. I trailed behind him and George to the door. "Thanks for having me," he said, turning toward me with that same inviting smile. "Anytime," I replied, the words spilling out before I could think better of it. George slapped Russell on the back. "See you tomorrow, my friend." And just like that, he was gone. I stood by the door, watching as Russell strolled down the driveway, his steps easy and assured. George locked up and gave me a quick kiss on the cheek. "Thanks for putting up with us tonight, hon." "You're amazing." I offered a weak smile, still caught up in my thoughts as I switched off the lights and climbed into bed beside my husband. The image of Russell lingered in my mind. His voice, his smile, the fleeting touch of his fingers against mine. It hung there like the refreshing scent of rain on a warm summer night. And for the first time in a long while, I found myself pondering what it would feel like to truly be seen again. After that night, Russell started visiting more frequently. George would invite him over for work discussions that required extra focus, or simply to unwind after a long day at the office. Russell slipped into our home as if he had always been a part of it, sprawled comfortably on the couch with a relaxed charm that brightened every room. At first, I observed him from a distance, much like a birdwatcher who feared getting too close and scaring off their subject. He was consistently polite and friendly, his smile warm, his eyes crinkling at the corners whenever he chuckled at one of George's well-worn jokes. And oh, how he laughed! It was a rich, smooth sound reminiscent of honey oozing from a spoon, a melody that hung in the air long after the moment passed. I told myself it was innocent. What did it matter if I enjoyed his company? What if I lingered just a little longer when I served him coffee or handed him a cold beer with a smile that might have been a touch too bright? It didn't mean anything. At least that's what I kept assuring myself over the next few weeks. Russell's visits became a part of our routine: Tuesday evenings, Friday nights, and sometimes an unexpected Sunday afternoon. As his presence in our home grew, so did his comfort level, not just with George but with me too. He would lean casually against the kitchen counter while I prepared snacks, chatting effortlessly about work, life, and everything in between. He shared tales of his upbringing, his family back in Detroit, and the highs and lows of collaborating with George. I found myself captivated by his storytelling, his voice smooth and easy, woven with humor and just the right touch of vulnerability. Gradually, a sense of familiarity began to blossom between us. It manifested in small gestures, like the playful wink he'd give when George fretted over trivial matters or the way he thanked me each time I handed him a drink, his fingers brushing against mine a heartbeat longer than necessary. It was the way his gaze would rest on me, not in an overtly obvious way, but just enough for me to feel genuinely acknowledged. Like I was more than just George's wife. It was intoxicating. Then came the evening when I got his number. It wasn't something I had planned. It just unfolded naturally one night when George went upstairs to take a phone call. leaving Russell and me alone in the living room. We were seated across from each other, the conversation flowing effortlessly. I don't even recall the topic, something trivial, like favorite films or travel aspirations that never materialized. And then almost impulsively I said, "You know, if you ever feel bored, you can text me." The words were out before I realized it. Russell raised an eyebrow, a small knowing smile playing on his lips. "You want my number, Gloria?" I felt my cheeks heat, but I shrugged casually. "Only if you're willing to share it." Without missing a beat, he pulled out his phone. "Here. Let's trade numbers to keep it fair." I handed him my phone. Just like that, his name and number were now saved in my contacts. Simple. Innocent. Or at least that's how it appeared on the surface. Deep down I knew something had changed. It began with texts, short, harmless messages. "Hope George isn't driving you too nuts tonight. You have no idea. Hang in there. You've got this." His messages became a lifeline on those days when the house felt too silent, and time seemed to stretch on endlessly. Just knowing that someone was thinking of me, even in the smallest way, made a significant difference. Then came a Tuesday afternoon when I decided to call him. George was tied up in meetings all day, and I found myself on the porch, sipping iced tea and feeling restless. Before I could convince myself not to, I dialed Russell's number. "Hey, Gloria," he answered, his voice warm and inviting. I smiled, feeling that familiar flutter in my chest. "Hi. Just thought I'd see what you were up to." He chuckled softly. "Not much. You sound bored." "I am," I sighed dramatically, twirling a loose strand of hair around my finger. "I was hoping you could entertain me." Russell's laughter rumbled through the phone, deep and easy. "You always call me when you're bored, and I always answer." I shot back playfully, grinning. "Because I enjoy talking to you." The way he said it made my heart race. I pressed the phone closer to my ear, relishing the warmth of his voice wrapping around me like a comforting blanket. Those calls became our shared secret. I'd reach out whenever loneliness or restlessness struck, and he always answered, no matter where he was or what he was doing. We could talk for hours about everything and nothing. I discovered that he adored jazz music, detested cold weather, and dreamt of visiting Italy someday. In turn, he learned things about me. Two secrets I hadn't shared with anyone in years, and slowly, without even realizing it, I found myself eagerly anticipating those conversations more than anything else in my day. Then came the moment everything shifted. It was a typical Friday morning. George had left for work early, leaving me alone with just the ticking of the kitchen clock as my companion. I picked up my phone, my fingers hovering over Russell's number, fully aware that I shouldn't. I knew it was a risk, but before I could think it through, I pressed dial. "Hey, Gloria," Russell answered on the first ring. "What's up?" "Not much," I replied, my voice a little breathless. "George is at work." There was a brief silence on the line, and I could almost hear him contemplating his next move. "Want me to come over?" His voice was low and inviting, making my pulse quicken. "Yes." 20 minutes later, when the doorbell rang, my heart pounded as if it might leap from my chest. I opened the door to find him standing on the porch, exuding calm confidence. "Hey," he greeted, his eyes locking onto mine. "Hey," I whispered, stepping aside to let him in. As he walked past me, his scent enveloped me, something warm and earthy that filled the air between us. I closed the door behind him, my hands trembling slightly. We stood there for a moment, the silence thick with unspoken tension. "You okay?" he asked softly, his gaze searching mine. I nodded, feeling dry in the throat. "Yeah. I'm glad you came." Russell smiled, a slow, knowing smile that sent butterflies fluttering in my stomach. "Me too, Gloria." We settled onto the couch, a comfortable silence enveloping us. I tried to keep my hands steady, but my fingers tapped nervously on my thigh. The atmosphere felt charged with unspoken possibilities, like a storm waiting to break. Leaning back, Russell stretched his long legs in front of him. He looked good, too good. His fitted shirt hugged his lean, muscular form, and his dark skin seemed to glow under the soft lighting. I stole glances at him, trying to gauge his expression, but he was staring straight ahead, one hand resting on his knee, looking a bit hesitant. I decided to break the silence, a playful smile creeping onto my lips. "So, Russell," I began, my voice light but teasing, "what do you think of me?" He turned to me with a slightly bashful look, a smile breaking across his face. "You're something else, Gloria." "Oh." I tilted my head, feigning innocence. "Is that a good thing or a bad thing?" He chuckled softly, glancing down at his hands. "Definitely good." "You're sweet," I whispered, inching a bit closer. Our knees brushed, and I felt a spark ignite within me. "But you know, you're kind of shy." He laughed nervously, rubbing the back of his neck. "I guess I am." I smiled, emboldened by his shyness. "You don't have to be shy around me." Slowly, I slid my hand over his, testing the waters. When he didn't pull away, I let my fingers trail along his arm, feeling the warmth of his skin beneath my touch. His breath caught, and I could tell I had his attention. "Gloria," he whispered, his voice a mix of uncertainty and longing. "I know," I murmured, gently pressing a finger against his lips. Leaning in closer, my heart raced. "I've wanted this for so long," I whispered, my lips brushing against his ear. He exhaled shakily, his hands resting awkwardly at his sides as if unsure how to proceed. I smiled to myself, feeling a thrilling mix of power and desire. I ran my hand down his chest, feeling the firm muscles beneath his shirt. His breathing grew heavier, and when I kissed the corner of his mouth, he turned his head just enough to meet my lips with his. I gasped softly at the unexpected thrill of it, my own sound surprising me. "Let's go somewhere more comfortable," I whispered, pulling back slightly to catch the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. He nodded, and I took his hand, leading him toward my bedroom. My heart raced with excitement and anxiety, but there was no turning back now. Once inside, we tumbled onto the bed. Russell's hands roamed over me, tentative at first, then growing more assured as I responded. There was something exhilarating about his shyness, the way he hesitated, as if unsure whether this was right. It made me feel powerful, like I was guiding him into something thrilling yet forbidden. He leaned over me, and I felt an overwhelming sense of fulfillment. He was both gentle and urgent, and I surrendered to the moment, the outside world fading away as we explored each other, teetering on the edge of complete surrender. Then I heard the front door open. My heart dropped. Russell froze above me, his eyes wide with panic. We could hear the familiar clink of George's keys hitting the hallway table, followed by footsteps slowly making their way down the hall. "Oh my God," I whispered, scrambling to sit up. My mind raced with a million thoughts. How to explain this, how to fix it. But before I could move, the bedroom door swung open. George stood there, calm and composed, his expression unreadable. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came. Russell sat frozen beside me, his chest heaving as we shared a long, agonizing moment of silence. Then, to my utter shock, George smiled. "Well," he said, his voice smooth and relaxed, as though he'd just walked in on us watching TV. "Looks like everything is going according to plan." I blinked, trying to comprehend his words. "What? What do you mean?" George stepped into the room, hands casually tucked into his pockets. "I brought Russell into our lives for a reason, Gloria." I stared at him, disbelief and confusion swirling within me. "What are you talking about?" He smiled again, a strange glint in his eyes. "I wanted to see what you'd do. I needed to know if you still had passion, if you still craved excitement." My mind reeled. "You set this up?" I whispered, my voice trembling with disbelief. George nodded, unfazed by my shock. "I knew if I asked you for something like this outright, you'd say no." I shook my head, struggling to process his words. "You wanted this to happen?" "Yes," he said, his gaze flicking momentarily to Russell and then back to me. "I wanted to reignite something between us, a spark, Gloria. Something we lost long ago." My heart raced, caught between disbelief and an unexpected thrill. "You're into this?" I asked, hardly able to grasp what I was hearing. George's smile widened. "I am. I've been wanting to explore something different. A new dynamic." He glanced at Russell again before focusing back on me, his expression calm and confident. "I'm into this dynamic, Gloria. I wanted to see how far we could go." A shiver ran down my spine, part fear, part exhilaration. George moved closer, his gaze steady. "You're enjoying yourself, aren't you?" I gulped, my body still buzzing with adrenaline. George settled into the chair by the window, crossing one leg over the other. "Don't let me stop you." I stared at him, my heart pounding wildly. Go on, he urged softly, his voice laced with calm authority. Enjoy yourself. For a moment I hesitated, my mind racing with doubts and questions. But then I looked at Russell, his eyes filled with uncertainty, and something inside me shifted. This was happening, and oddly enough it felt right. I leaned back toward Russell. He hesitated for only a moment before his hands found my waist. I felt George's gaze on us, steady and unwavering, as Russell and I surrendered to the moment once more. The tension, the thrill of the forbidden. It all surged back stronger than before. And this time there was no holding back.